You're about to hear a story that doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the quiet of an empty house at night. The kind of silence where something is very wrong, but no one realizes it yet. In July of 1991, police officers in Milwaukee responded to what sounded like a routine call. A man running through the streets, handcuffed, panicked, begging for help. They assumed it was a domestic situation, a misunderstanding. They had no idea they were about to walk into one of the most horrifying crime scenes in American history. Inside a small apartment sat a refrigerator, and inside that refrigerator was a human head. But by the time officers opened that door, 17 lives were already gone. This case didn't explode overnight. It grew slowly, over years. Neighbors smelled something foul. People reported strange behavior. A bleeding child was returned to the very man who hurt him. Police encounters ended with warnings instead of arrests. Again and again, the system brushed past evil. And evil learned it could get away with it. He didn't kill for money. He didn't kill for revenge. He didn't even kill out of anger. He killed because he wanted people to stay forever. And when they tried to leave, he made sure they never could. This wasn't just murder. This was control, obsession, isolation taken to its most disturbing extreme. He wanted possession, not relationships. Bodies, not people. And by the end, his apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was a graveyard. For over a decade, he lived among ordinary people, went to work, talked to neighbors, blended into society. A quiet man, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of person you wouldn't look twice at, until police finally saw what was hidden behind his door. Photographs, bones, barrels of acid, and evidence that some victims had been kept long after death. Tonight, we're not just telling you what he did. We're telling you what was missed. The warning signs, the encounters, the moments where everything could have ended, but didn't. Because some monsters don't hide. They're ignored. I'm Johnny Black, and this is Unsaid Case Files. Tonight's case file: Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Monster. Before the headlines, before the trial, before the apartment filled with evidence, there was just a quiet boy. Jeffrey Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960. Nothing about his birth suggested horror. No warning stamped onto his childhood. No prophecy of violence. To outsiders, he looked ordinary. A father studying chemistry. A mother struggling with emotional instability. A suburban home. A typical American upbringing. But inside the house, the atmosphere felt different. Arguments were constant. Tension lived in the walls. And Jeffrey learned something very early. People leave. Emotionally first, physically later. As a child, he wasn't aggressive. He wasn't cruel to other kids. He was distant. Teachers described him as polite, quiet, forgettable, not bullied, not popular, just invisible. And invisibility can be dangerous because no one watches invisible children closely. Around age 4, something small happened. His father showed him how to clean animal bones. It was meant to be a science lesson, curiosity, education. But Jeffrey didn't react like most children. He became fascinated, not grossed out, not afraid, interested. He started collecting dead animals, roadkill, bones, carcasses from the woods. He didn't just find them, he studied them, dissected them, preserved them in jars. To him, they weren't disgusting. They were calming, predictable. Animals didn't leave. Animals didn't reject him. Animals didn't argue. They stayed exactly where he put them. By adolescence, the distance grew deeper. He drank alcohol during the day at school. Teachers thought it was a phase. Classmates thought it was a joke. He even earned a nickname for strange pranks, pretending seizures, making noises, acting bizarre in public. People laughed, but laughter can hide problems. No one asked why a teenager needed to stay intoxicated just to exist. No one asked why he preferred isolation. And no one knew his fantasies were changing. They weren't about friendship. They weren't about romance. They were about control. Total control. He later admitted he fantasized about having someone who couldn't leave him. Not emotionally, not physically. Someone who would stay, no matter what. At 16, he waited in bushes with a baseball bat for a jogger he found attractive. He planned to knock him unconscious. The jogger never came that day. So the world kept turning, unaware it had just narrowly avoided its first victim. In 1978, everything around him collapsed. His parents divorced. His mother moved away with his younger brother. And Jeffrey, just 18 years old, was left alone in the house. Completely alone. No supervision. No routine. No interruption to the thoughts growing in his mind. 3 weeks after graduation, he picked up a hitchhiker. And the thoughts he'd carried for years finally became action. The boy no one noticed was gone, and someone far more dangerous had taken his place. June 18th, 1978. Summer had just begun. School was over. The future was uncertain, and Jeffrey Dahmer was alone in the family home. No parents, no brother, no one checking where he went or who he brought back. That afternoon, he saw a hitchhiker on the road. 18-year-old Stephen Hicks. Hicks was heading to a concert. Young, friendly, trusting. Dahmer offered him a ride. Then a beer. Then a place to hang out for a while. There was nothing unusual about it. 2 teenagers drinking music and passing time. Until Hicks decided he wanted to leave. For most people, that moment ends the interaction. A goodbye, a wave, a closed door. But for Dahmer, this was the moment he feared most. Rejection. Being left behind. The thing he'd spent years obsessing over was about to happen again. So he made a decision. If people wouldn't stay, he would make them. As Hicks stood up to go, Dahmer grabbed a 10-pound dumbbell. He struck him from behind. Hicks collapsed. Still alive, still breathing. Dahmer then strangled him. Later, he would admit the motive was simple. He didn't want Hicks to leave. The murder wasn't impulsive panic afterward. It became methodical. He dragged the body to the basement. Hours passed. Then curiosity took over. He removed the clothes, touched the body, studied it. The fantasies he'd imagined for years were no longer imagination. They were real. And instead of horror, he felt calm. The next day, the cover-up began. He dissected the body, buried the remains in the backyard. Weeks later, he dug them back up again, dissolved the flesh in acid, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, scattered them in the woods behind the house. Nothing left to find. No missing person report that led to him. No witnesses. No suspicion. He had just committed murder, and the world moved forward as if nothing happened. But something important changed that day. Not just that he killed. It was that he learned he could. And more importantly, he learned he could get away with it. For 9 years, he wouldn't kill again. He tried to live normally. College failed because of drinking. The Army discharged him for alcoholism. Jobs came and went. From the outside, he looked like a struggling young adult. But internally, the fantasies never stopped. They were evolving, growing more specific, more disturbing. And eventually, the urge returned, stronger than before. The first time wasn't an accident. It was a rehearsal. And 9 years later, the real pattern would begin. For nearly a decade, there was silence. No bodies discovered. No investigations connected to him. No reason for anyone to suspect the quiet man working ordinary jobs. Jeffrey Dahmer moved between states, bounced between responsibilities, and struggled to hold his life together. Alcohol dominated everything. College lasted only months before he dropped out. The Army discharged him after repeated incidents of intoxication. He drifted, unemployed, directionless. Eventually, his father sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, hoping structure and stability might fix him. For a short time, it almost worked. He attended church, did chores, looked for work, but inside the thoughts never left. They had simply been waiting. By the mid-1980s, Dahmer began visiting gay bars and bathhouses in Milwaukee. Not for relationships, not for connection, for control. He didn't want partners who could talk, or move, or leave. So he began drugging men, sleeping pills crushed into drinks. Once they lost consciousness, he did whatever he wanted. They woke up confused, disoriented. Most never understood what had happened. And he learned another dangerous lesson. He could violate someone and still walk away free. In 1987, the line between fantasy and murder disappeared again. At a bar, he met 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi. They checked into a hotel room together. The next morning, Dahmer woke up to find Tuomi dead beside him, beaten severely. He claimed he didn't remember the killing, but what he did afterward, he remembered clearly. He packed the body into a suitcase, took it back to his grandmother's house, dismembered it piece by piece. From that moment forward, the pattern was born. The killings didn't happen all at once. They came in intervals, months apart, then weeks, then days. He lured men home with promises of money or photos, drugged them, strangled them. Then he began keeping parts, skulls, bones, photographs, not trophies of anger, but souvenirs of possession. He later admitted he wasn't interested in death itself. He wanted someone who could never abandon him. And the only way he knew how to guarantee that was to remove their ability to exist without him. Warning signs appeared everywhere. He was arrested multiple times for indecent exposure. Once for drugging a 13-year-old boy. He received probation. No one connected the pattern. No one searched deeper. No one realized people were disappearing around him. Because Jeffrey Dahmer didn't look like a predator. He looked like a neighbor. By 1990, he moved into his own apartment in Milwaukee, and for the first time, he had privacy. No grandmother, no witnesses, no interruptions. The pace of killing was about to change, and the horror inside that apartment would soon become impossible to ignore. In May of 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved into the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee. Apartment 213. Small, cheap, forgettable. The kind of place no one pays attention to, which made it perfect. At first, neighbors noticed nothing unusual. He was quiet, polite, kept to himself. But slowly, things changed. A strange smell began drifting through the hallway. Rotten, chemical, sweet and sickening at the same time. Tenants complained to management again and again. Dahmer always had an explanation. Spoiled meat in the freezer. Dead fish in his aquarium. Plumbing problems. Each time, the complaints stopped. No one pushed further. And the door to 213 stayed closed. Inside that apartment, the killings became routine. He brought men home from bars with promises of money for photos. He offered drinks. The drinks were drugged. Once unconscious, he strangled them. But murder was no longer the end. It was the beginning. He photographed the bodies, posed them, studied them. Then he dismembered them in the bathtub with surgical precision. Bones boiled, flesh dissolved in acid, skulls bleached and kept. He later admitted he wanted to build something, an altar, a place where he could sit, surrounded by those who would never leave him. not relationships, possession. In 1990 alone, multiple men disappeared after being last seen near Dahmer's neighborhood. No connection was made, no pattern recognized, because each victim came from vulnerable backgrounds: runaways, hitchhikers, young men far from home. The kind of disappearances society too often overlooks. But the apartment couldn't hide everything. Residents heard thumps at night, a saw running at odd hours, glass breaking. The smell grew worse in summer heat. One neighbor reported it smelled like something died inside the walls. She was right, but she didn't know how right. By 1991, the killings accelerated, from occasional to weekly. Dahmer wasn't just murdering anymore. He was experimenting, trying to create what he called a living companion, someone who would obey him and never leave. And his methods were becoming more dangerous, more desperate, and impossible to contain. Soon, someone would escape, and apartment 213 would finally be opened. Before we continue, if you're listening right now and you're part of the Unsaid Case Files community, thank you. This show grows entirely through listeners like you. So if you want to support the podcast, there are a few simple ways to help. Follow the show on your platform so you never miss an episode. Leave a rating or review. It helps more people find these stories. And share this episode with someone who enjoys true crime. Every follow, every share, every review keeps these case files alive. All right, let's continue. By the summer of 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was no longer focused on avoiding detection. His behavior had escalated. Killing was no longer the only objective. He was obsessed with control. He wanted a person who could not leave him, someone present but unable to resist. So he began carrying out disturbing experiments, attempting to alter his victim's consciousness. Every attempt failed, and every victim died. But he continued. Then came May 26th, 1991. 14-year-old Conorak Synthosamphone stood outside a mall, young, alone, trusting the wrong stranger. Dahmer offered money for photographs. The boy agreed. Inside apartment 213, he was drugged and assaulted. At some point, he lost consciousness, and Dahmer left the apartment for a nearby bar, leaving him alone. But this time, the boy woke up, disoriented, injured, barely able to communicate. He stumbled out of the apartment and into the street. 3 women saw him and immediately called 911. When police arrived, they encountered a terrified child who could barely stand. Moments later, Dahmer approached calmly. He claimed the boy was his adult partner and that they had argued after drinking. The women insisted something was wrong. They tried to explain he was a minor and needed help. Officers hesitated, but they believed Dahmer. They did not check his background. They did not verify his identity. Instead, they returned the boy to apartment 213. Inside, an officer briefly looked around, but did not conduct a full search. The situation was labeled a domestic dispute. Police left. The door closed. Shortly afterward, the boy died inside the apartment. The witnesses called police again. No one returned. This moment would later be recognized as one of the most devastating failures in modern policing. Because inside that apartment at the time, there was already evidence of another killing. Had the officer searched further, multiple lives might have been saved. Instead, the murders continued, and within weeks, someone would escape and reveal the truth behind that door. July 22nd, 1991. Jeffrey Dahmer walked through a Milwaukee neighborhood looking for another victim. By now it was routine, a friendly approach, an offer of money, photos, beer. Most nights, it worked. That night he approached 3 men. Only one agreed. 32-year-old Tracy Edwards. Inside apartment 213, Edwards immediately felt something was wrong. The smell hit him first. Rotting, chemical, thick in the air. Dahmer explained it away. Spoiled meat, broken freezer, dead fish. But the tension didn't leave. They talked briefly, watched television. Then Dahmer suddenly pulled out handcuffs. He snapped one around Edwards' wrist. Edwards laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of joke. It wasn't. Dahmer held a knife. Calm, soft voice. No anger. He told Edwards he planned to take pictures and keep his heart. Not metaphorically, literally. Edwards realized he wasn't dealing with a robber or an unstable man. He was trapped with someone who had done this before. Many times. For nearly 5 hours, Edwards stayed alive by talking, agreeing, calming him, pretending friendship. He waited for a mistake. Eventually, Dahmer's attention drifted to the television. The handcuffs were still attached, but loose enough. Edwards saw his chance. He punched Dahmer and ran, barefoot, handcuffed, into the night. At 11:30 p.m., 2 police officers spotted him in the street, panicked, breathing hard, still wearing the cuff. He told them a man had tried to kill him. They walked him back to apartment 213. Dahmer greeted them politely, relaxed, almost cooperative. He claimed it was just a misunderstanding. The key, he said, was in the bedroom. One officer went to retrieve it. The moment he stepped inside, he saw them. Polaroid photographs. Dozens. Naked bodies, dismembered, staged in unnatural positions. Realizing what they were looking at, he told his partner, "These are real." Dahmer tried to fight. Within seconds, he was handcuffed. Then the officers opened the refrigerator. A human head sat on the bottom shelf. Inside the apartment they found more skulls, human organs, a heart in the freezer, barrels of acid, bones throughout the rooms. What they had thought was a disturbance call was one of the most horrifying crime scenes ever discovered. As Dahmer lay on the floor arrested, he calmly said, For what I did, I should be dead. For the first time in 13 years, the killings stopped. But the full truth was still coming. Because investigators were about to learn just how many lives had been taken inside apartment 213. The night Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, police already knew it was bad. But they didn't yet understand how bad. At first, investigators believed they had discovered a single murder scene, maybe two. Then they started counting. Heads in the refrigerator, skulls in the bedroom, human organs in the freezer, barrels dissolving bodies in acid. This wasn't a crime of rage. This was systematic, deliberate, repeated. And the man responsible wasn't hysterical, wasn't denying anything. He was ready to talk. Inside the interrogation room, Dahmer waived his right to a lawyer. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't ask for a deal. He simply said he wanted to confess. For hours, then days, he described everything. Calmly, step by step, victim by victim. He admitted the first murder in 1978, then the second, 9 years later. After that, the killings accelerated. He explained how he chose victims, usually young men alone, how he gained trust with money offers or photographs, how he drugged them so they wouldn't suffer or fight, then strangled them. But what shocked investigators most was what happened after death. Dahmer wasn't killing out of hatred. He wasn't killing out of anger. He said he killed because he didn't want people to leave. He wanted permanent companionship. And once they were dead, he kept them. He photographed them, slept beside them, spoke to them. He preserved skulls and bones because it made him feel they were still with him. He even admitted to consuming parts of some victims, believing it made them become a part of him forever. Detectives listened for over 60 hours. By the end, the confession filled hundreds of pages. 17 victims, some of whom had been reported missing for years. Families finally had answers, but those answers were worse than uncertainty, because many deaths could have been prevented. Multiple police encounters, multiple arrests, multiple complaints. Each time, the system stopped just short. And Dahmer learned he could continue. He told detectives he knew what he was doing was wrong. But once the urge started, he couldn't stop thinking about it. It consumed him. Every day, every hour, until he found another victim. For investigators, the case was no longer about who committed the crimes. It was about understanding how this went unnoticed for so long. And soon, the courtroom would face the same question. Was Jeffrey Dahmer evil or insane? January 30th, 1992. The courtroom in Milwaukee was silent as Jeffrey Dahmer entered. No chains clanking dramatically, no emotional outbursts. He walked in calmly, expression blank. He had already pleaded guilty, but there was one question left to answer. Was he legally insane? The defense didn't deny the murders. They couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, remains, confessions. Instead, they argued something else. That Dahmer's mind was so damaged, so consumed by compulsion, that he couldn't control himself. Psychiatrists testified that he suffered from severe mental disorders, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, alcohol dependence. They emphasized his necrophilia, his compulsive attraction to corpses. They argued he wasn't killing for pleasure in the traditional sense. He was trying to create permanent companionship, to eliminate abandonment, to silence loneliness. They said his mind was sick, broken, beyond rational control. But the prosecution had a different argument. They said he planned every murder. He selected victims carefully, drugged them intentionally, destroyed evidence, moved locations when needed. He knew what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong. That's why he hid it. That's why he lied. That's why he avoided detection for over a decade. One expert testified, if someone has to drink alcohol before committing murder to overcome inhibition, that means they know it's wrong. The jury listened for 2 weeks. They heard about the altar he planned to build from skulls. They saw the photographs. They listened to psychological experts debate whether obsession equals insanity. The trial wasn't about what he did. It was about responsibility. Was he a monster beyond control, or a man who chose to become one? On February 15th, 1992, the verdict was delivered. Sane. Guilty. On all counts. 16 life sentences. Nearly 1,000 years in prison. No possibility of parole. No death penalty. Wisconsin had abolished it decades earlier. When given the chance to speak, Dahmer stood and read a prepared statement. He said he never wanted freedom. He said he deserved death. He apologized to the families. He claimed his actions were driven by mental illness, but he accepted punishment. There were no tears, no dramatic breakdown, just quiet acceptance. The man who terrified a nation would now live the rest of his life in a prison cell. But his story wasn't finished yet, because prison would become the final chapter. And even behind bars, Jeffrey Dahmer would not escape violence. After sentencing, Jeffrey Dahmer disappeared behind prison walls. Columbia Correctional Institution, Wisconsin. For the families of the victims, the nightmare was over. For Dahmer, a different reality began. At first, prison officials feared he wouldn't survive. His crimes were widely known. Inmates recognized him immediately. So he was placed in isolation. 23 hours a day, alone in a cell. No general population, limited contact, constant supervision. Even the prison understood someone would try to kill him. But over time, Dahmer requested to leave isolation. He said he accepted whatever happened to him. Eventually, he was moved into the general population. He worked cleaning bathrooms and common areas. And strangely, he became known as polite, quiet, even helpful. Some guards described him as one of the least troublesome inmates, which only made the contrast more disturbing. Because the man cleaning floors was responsible for one of the worst serial murder cases in American history. During his imprisonment, he changed in ways many didn't expect. He began reading the Bible, regularly meeting with a minister. Eventually, he was baptized. He claimed he had found religion and accepted responsibility for what he'd done. In interviews, he stated, "If there is no accountability after death, there would be no reason to change behavior." He said he deserved whatever happened to him, even death. But prison has its own rules. Not everyone believed remorse mattered. To other inmates, Dahmer wasn't a man seeking redemption. He was a target. He was attacked once, a failed attempt. He survived, but tension never left. He reportedly joked about his crimes in dark ways, sometimes shaping food to resemble body parts. Whether as gallows humor or coping, no one truly knew. What was certain, he knew he wouldn't die of old age there. On the morning of November 28th, 1994, Dahmer was assigned to clean the prison gym bathrooms with two other inmates. They were left briefly unsupervised. Minutes later, guards found him on the floor, severely beaten with a metal bar. He was alive when discovered, but died on the way to the hospital. He was 34 years old. The man who spent years controlling life and death lost control of his own. For many families, it wasn't closure. Nothing could undo what happened. But it ended the possibility of his story growing any further. Except for the question that still remained. How did it go unnoticed for so long? When people remember this case, they remember the apartment, the photographs, the refrigerator, the unimaginable details. But the most disturbing part of this story isn't what happened inside apartment 213. It's what happened outside of it. Because Jeffrey Dahmer didn't operate in darkness. He operated in plain sight. He was arrested multiple times before the murders were discovered. Indecent exposure in public places, drugging men, assaulting a minor. Each incident ended the same way. Warnings, probation, short sentences. No deep investigation. No connection of behavior. Every time the system encountered him, it treated the moment as isolated, instead of part of a pattern. Then came the night that defined the case. A 14-year-old boy escaped his apartment, naked, bleeding, unable to speak clearly. Witnesses begged police to help. They insisted something was wrong. Officers believed Dahmer instead. They returned the child to the very man who hurt him. Minutes later, he was dead. That single moment changed how police training would be discussed for decades. because it proved something terrifying. Sometimes evil succeeds not because it's invisible, but because it's dismissed. Many victims were vulnerable, runaways, minorities, young men without strong support systems. Disappearances weren't immediately prioritized. Reports didn't connect, and Dahmer understood that. He chose victims society might overlook, not out of strategy at first, but once he noticed the lack of response, it reinforced his confidence. He later admitted he felt unstoppable, not powerful because of strength, but because of absence. No one was stopping him. After his arrest, departments reviewed procedures. Communication systems changed. Missing persons databases improved. Officers trained differently for welfare checks. His crimes reshaped investigative protocol across the country. But those changes came at a terrible cost. 17 lives. Families left with questions that could never truly be answered. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a criminal mastermind. He didn't evade police through brilliance. He slipped through cracks. Social cracks. Institutional cracks. Human cracks. And once inside them, he stayed there for 13 years. The horror of this case isn't only what one man did. It's how many chances existed to stop him. And how close the world came, so many times, to ending it sooner. Because sometimes the scariest truth isn't that monsters exist. It's that they can live next door and be seen without being recognized. Some stories end with an arrest. Some end with a conviction. But cases like this never really end. Because even after the trial, after the prison sentence, after the death of the killer, the questions remain. Could it have been stopped sooner? Would someone still be alive if one decision had changed? If one door had been opened? One report taken seriously? One warning not ignored? 17 people lost their lives, not to a sudden burst of violence, but to a pattern that grew over years. A pattern that existed in plain view. And the hardest truth in this case is that evil didn't hide particularly well. It blended in. Quiet, polite, unremarkable. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one no one notices. If there's anything cases like this teach us, it's that small details matter. Instinct matters. Voices matter. And when something feels wrong, it deserves attention. Because history has shown us again and again, ignoring warning signs doesn't make them disappear. Thank you for listening to Unsaid Case Files. I'm Johnny Black. If you want to support the show, the best thing you can do is follow the podcast on your platform. Leave a rating and share this episode with someone who would find it interesting. It helps more than you realize and keeps these stories being told. You can also find full episodes and updates wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, Stay aware, stay curious, and remember, some truths stay hidden until someone chooses to see them.